How royal families got rich. Crowns, land, and money through history. When you picture a royal family, what comes to mind first? Crowns, palaces, jewels. But behind all that splendor sits something far more ordinary and far more powerful. Land, taxation, and a financial system built with extraordinary care over centuries. Royal wealth didn't appear by accident. It's the result of a structure built, sometimes ruthlessly, sometimes with real cleverness, generation after generation. Let's start the story in England, home to the world's most recognized royal family today. In 1066, when William, Duke of Normandy, conquered England, the first thing he did wasn't put on a crown. The first thing he did was record every inch of the country. This massive inventory project became known to history as the Domesday Book, a document listing, village by village, field by field, mill by mill, exactly what the newly conquered kingdom actually contained. Why did he do this? Because William understood something very simple. To rule a kingdom, you first needed to know exactly how wealthy it was. Land was the real currency of the era, and William declared a substantial share of the conquered territory his own personal property. That land formed the foundation of what's still known today as the Crown Estate. Over the following centuries, the English royal family turned this land ownership into a genuine revenue engine. Rent collected from tenant farmers, income from timber harvested in royal forests, precious metals extracted from mines. All of it flowed directly to the crown. But one of the real turning points came under Henry VII. When Henry took the throne in 1485, the royal treasury had been nearly emptied by the preceding Wars of the Roses. Henry, through an extraordinarily meticulous and calculating style of governance, reorganized the tax collection system, curbed the power of the nobility, and refilled the royal coffers. Some historians describe him as England's first genuinely fiscally disciplined king. His son, Henry VIII, used the fortune his father had accumulated in a very different way. Henry's 6 marriages, his wars, and his obsession with palace building drained the treasury quickly. But Henry's perhaps greatest economic move was breaking away from the Catholic Church. This split, which took place in the 1530s, wasn't just a religious event. It was an enormous economic one as well. Henry dissolved England's monasteries and transferred their land, along with their gold and silver possessions, directly into the royal treasury. This is considered one of the largest transfers of wealth in English history. Now let's cross the channel to France, because a very different story unfolded there. The French monarchy operated with a far more centralized financial system than England, especially under the man known as the Sun King, Louis XIV. During his extraordinarily long reign, from 1643 to 1715, Louis pushed royal power, and with it royal wealth, to almost unimaginable heights. Louis's finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, essentially rebuilt the French economy from the ground up. He centralized tax collection, grew French industry through state support, and turned France into one of the wealthiest kingdoms in Europe. But a large share of that wealth flowed directly into Louis's own personal glory. Think about the Palace of Versailles. This wasn't just a palace. It was tangible proof of an empire's economic power. Its construction cost millions of livres in the currency of the time, and Louis did this deliberately, to send a message to the rest of Europe's kingdoms about exactly how powerful France had become. But that splendor came at a price. Louis's wars and palace expenses badly strained the French treasury, and this financial pressure compounded, generation after generation, all the way down to his great-great-grandson, Louis XVI. One of the underlying causes of the French Revolution, which erupted in 1789, was precisely this: an ordinary population crushed under heavy taxation, while the royal family continued living in almost unimaginable luxury. Marie Antoinette's name is still invoked today as a symbol of excessive spending, even though several of the famous phrases attributed to her are considered exaggerated or entirely fabricated by historians. Still, the actual spending of the royal court was substantial enough to genuinely enrage a population struggling under the weight of taxation. Now let's travel to another continent and another dynasty entirely, the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs were perhaps history's cleverest royal house when it came to wealth built through marriage rather than war. Their famous motto captured this perfectly: "Let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry." And that's exactly what they did. Rather than acquiring territory through conquest, the Habsburgs carefully arranged marriages that brought vast stretches of Europe under their control. When Maximilian I's son, Philip, married Juana, heir to the Spanish throne, it gave the Habsburgs access to Spain's enormous wealth, and later, to the flood of gold and silver arriving from the New World. The grandson of that marriage, Charles V, inherited one of the largest empires in history when he took the throne in the 16th century. Spain, Austria, most of what's now the Netherlands and Belgium, parts of Italy, and vast colonies in the New World. The economic power behind this empire rested directly on silver flowing from the Americas, particularly from the mines of Potosi in what is now Bolivia. Let's return to England once more, because the most interesting transformation of modern royal finance happened right there. In 1760, when George III took the throne, he made a striking decision. He transferred the income from the crown estate directly to the state, and in exchange began receiving a fixed, regular allowance from Parliament. This arrangement became known as the Civil List, and it formed the foundation of the modern royal financing system that still exists today. This was actually a remarkably clever move. By giving up unpredictable, fluctuating land revenue, the king secured a guaranteed income, but in exchange, royal spending now came under parliamentary oversight. Today, the British royal family's finances still operate on this same underlying logic, just modernized. Under the system known as the sovereign grant, a set percentage of the crown estate's annual profit, typically somewhere between 12 and 25%, depending on the year, is transferred directly to the royal family. The crown estate itself manages a portfolio worth billions of pounds today, including vast real estate in central London, much of Britain's coastline, and a range of commercial investments. Here's the interesting part. The royal family doesn't directly own these lands. The crown estate is technically structured as property belonging to the monarch, but which the monarch cannot personally sell or dispose of, meaning the royal family benefits from a share of the income without being able to liquidate the underlying assets. This is a remarkably clever outcome of centuries of financial evolution, a system that both preserves the crown's traditional wealth and adapts to modern democratic oversight. Under Elizabeth II, the royal family's personal wealth also stood out as a separate matter entirely. Among the Queen's personal holdings were properties like Balmoral Castle and Sandringham Estate, real estate owned directly by the family, entirely independent of the state. This shows that royal income operates in layers. On one side, a regulated income connected to the state, and on the other, an entirely private, personal fortune. So what about other royal families around the world today? The Saudi royal family operates on an entirely different model, one directly intertwined with the country's oil revenue, with thousands of princes having varying degrees of access to state resources depending on their standing within the family. There's also the case of the Russian Romanovs, whose story offers perhaps the starkest lesson in how quickly royal wealth can vanish entirely. By the early 20th century, the Romanov dynasty controlled one of the largest personal fortunes in the world, vast estates, extraordinary jewel collections, and direct ownership over enormous stretches of Russian territory. But when the Russian Revolution swept through in 1917, that entire fortune was seized almost overnight. The family itself was executed the following year, and centuries of accumulated wealth, land, and treasure passed entirely into state hands within a matter of months. It stands as one of history's most dramatic reminders that royal wealth, however vast, has always ultimately depended on political stability to survive. This comparison shows us something genuinely important. Royal wealth can never be explained by a single formula. Some families preserved or lost their fortunes through land ownership, some through marriage strategy, some through natural resources, and some through modern constitutional arrangements, or the complete lack of them. And maybe that's the most striking lesson buried in this entire story. Crowns, palaces, jewels, all of that is simply the visible surface. The real power of a royal family was always hidden somewhere else entirely. In land records, in tax systems, in marriage contracts, and in financial structures carefully maintained across centuries. From William's Domesday Book to today's Crown Estate, remarkably little has actually changed. Whoever controls the land, whoever manages its income, holds the real power. The crown itself was always just the symbol sitting on top of it.